Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are back once again with the Economancer. So, first off, I got a new camera. I hope it looks nicer. Second, today we're going to be discussing religion. Okay, so religion has long been a topic of study for scholars, psychologists, sociologists alike. However, Nicholas Luhmann's work argues against the idea of psychologizing religion. So, what is psychologizing religion? That would be something like religion existing only in our subjective feelings. So this would be divorced from anything besides the relief of suffering or the application of meaning. But the meaning is entirely subjective in the religious system. And then you get this idea of this new age thought that religion is some psychic medicine or is only there as an institutional arrangement that applies rules for how the world ought to be. In this video, I will present Luhmann's perspective and explain why he believes reducing religion to a mere psychological phenomenon is inaccurate. So we're going to review the arguments. So 1, religion is a separate communication system. Luhmann argues that religion is a distinct communication system that should be understood as such. It is not derived from the psyche, but it operates as a separate meaning-making system. Second, religion provides meaning in places where meaning cannot be observed. So according to Luhmann, religion offers meaning in situations where it is impossible to observe or comprehend the underlying causes. In other words, it provides a way to make sense of the world without scientific explanation. Third argument, religion is adept at evolving. Luhmann also notes that religion can evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. This ability to change and evolve allows religious communication to persist and maintain its significance, even if it takes different forms over time. So, in his book, A Systems Theory of Religion, Luhmann begins by deconstructing the argument that sociology of religion should treat religion as social facts or forms and should be able to provide a non-religious description of religious institutions and belief systems. However, he makes the case that if you're looking at the phenomenology of religion without accepting the premises of this transcendental theory, you will end up confusing phenomena with facts. Therefore, you're going to misunderstand this paradox of intersubjectivity and interobjectivity. So let's think of this a bit. If you're trying to make the case about religion and you start from the premise that you do not agree with some transcendental phenomenon, then you can't analyze the religion itself. And that is why if you read any philosopher's work from an atheistic position, then you first have to dismiss the idea of God and then try to delve internally. However, if you read philosophical theology or theology in general, you will find that it starts with the premise that there is a God, and then you work your way down from there. Another thing that Luhmann brings up is that a lot of the work in atheistic or secular philosophy, sociology, psychology, so on and so forth, misses out on the justification for universality found in that transcendentality of the consciousness. Because the goal is to make a valid statement for every empirical consciousness. However, if you're familiar with religion, you can see that there is a system that is closed off from humanity. Typically, we call that the holy. It is both the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega of the analysis, which is not something you'll find in religious or in non-religious or secular and atheistic psychology and sociology. So if you're trying to observe religion and you see that it is valid for other people observing it, how can you distinguish it from simple attitudes of faith or belief? And this is something that's said to those individuals that are like, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. How do you differentiate your spirituality from religion? So another piece by Luhmann here to think about is that he's an anti-humanist. So I'm sure that will shock some people, but I don't think they understand the definition. So what is an anti-humanist based on Nicholas Luhmann? Well, he believed that focusing on individual human experience and agency as the center of social and cultural analysis was insufficient. He argued that social systems such as the economy, politics, and law are the real driving forces of society and that human consciousness and action are just byproducts of these systems, which is something we could say that human consciousness is a byproduct of the religious system. Luhmann believed that human beings should not be seen as subjects of history, but rather as objects of social systems, which are self-generating and self-organizing. He wants to get away from this humanistic portrayal of religion and trying to reduce it to this phenomenon of consciousness, because the way he looks at it is consciousness, or the soul, not spirit, is essentially a thing that externalizes the world so that we can internalize reality. Here's a quote. Religion is not simply a reflection performed by consciousness, because that would mean turning the self of consciousness into an object and treating it as a thing, which terms such as soul, spirit, and person. Religion cannot be adequately understood according to the schemas of consciousness, the subject, object, or the observer in the object, because it is located on both sides of the distinction between self and other reference. Here's another novel idea to think about when it comes to psychologizing religion as an incoherent worldview. When we're psychologizing, or whatever piece of analysis you want to use, you have to observe the thing. By observing something, we can create meaning about that thing. Yet we cannot fully observe God. So Luhmann makes the case that religion is different from any endeavor because it can create meaning, or that meaning is possible if something always remains unobservable. I don't know of any other human endeavor in which meaning is created or made or is even possible when something cannot be observed. You don't create meaning in the absence of a thing. And to think about this, like, this goes back to that argument about thinking about nothing. You can't actually think about nothing. You will eventually think about something, or in reference to thinking about nothing, you think of nothing as something, right? And so you're in this loop. But religion can create the meaning that is unobserved in the nothing. Now, Luhmann does reference powerful myths and how they're supposed to help an individual come to terms with being one among many. However, he notes that they exist only as concentrations of communication in how we exist in life. And he also notes that analyzing specific performances of consciousness would never make religion comprehensible and would not explain the evolution of religion's major forms, especially Abrahamic faiths. Something to note here about Luhmann is that he takes communication as its own product. He does not believe communication is a product of the individual psychic system. He does not find it to be a product of the objective meaning of the information being presented, or societal contexts and institutions that making understanding communication possible. It is its own entity. That is why he makes the statement, only communication communicates. Now, here's an important thing, because you can't reduce these communicative actions to the individual psyche, the social context, or the object itself. We must understand that communication operates subject to the environment without having to contact it. And if you watch my video on baptizing Luhmann, this is an essential part of the Orthodox tradition of communicating with God, or the energies of God, so on and so forth, through a selected and codified religious language. That divine language is what allows for this communicative action to be. But that is not of the individual psyche. In fact, he talks a lot about I think it's Gellner's book on the Spirit, or the Holy Spirit. And he says this is a lot how I see this communicative, communal spirit being in communication. And that's possibly where he got the idea from the Lutheran thought of what the Holy Spirit is and how it works in our communicative world. And that this, I guess I should say, more older tradition of Christianity as a communicative paradigm is really what he focuses on, and how he brings in his work in communications theory. So the last argument presented by Luhmann in the first chapter is the meaning of death. We all know death is an integral part of our lives and probably the most authentic experience. Death, unlike any other part of the social system, affects everyone, no matter where you are in the hierarchy, whether you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth or born in the ditch outside of a farm. You're going to die. So the universal experience of humanity is pain and death, right? And that may sound morbid, but it's just really a fact of reality. Now, something to think about here is death is not just valued or approximated by just religion. You have individuals doing the statistical value of life for an insurance company. So they're giving meaning to death based on the value of money. You can think of it from your job or career. Your death impacts this company and the organization. You can think of law and how a will work, and looks at death with legal consequences, such as the death of a loved one. All of these different systems are trying to understand the meaning of death. But religion is the only one that gives a fundamental answer to what death is. From the Christian perspective, death is, coming to judgment, or it's coming to the actualization of your being as you're moving to communion closer and closer with the triune Godhead. All of these things, these are very definitive answered topics that you can't observe, because once you're dead, and you can't observe someone who's already dead because they no longer exist as an observable thing. Their body is observed, but their consciousness and their spirit are no longer observed. So again, we have meaning of something that's not observed. Now, later on, Luhmann does go into some anthropological and biological statements on death, such as looking at the functionalist perspective from someone like Talcott Parsons. The functionalist perspective proposes that we have corresponding rituals associated with death that resolve tensions and alleviate psychological strain into harmless behavior. And this is typically how things from an individual such as Jordan Peterson are wrapped up in these religious structures. They impose meaning by getting rid of some of these psychological harms and using that energy of the psyche towards something beneficial to yourself, familial system, or society. So what does Luhmann eventually propose instead? He says that death doesn't have a meaning without religion, because only religion can sufficiently mobilize knowledge and actualize redundancy so that death, which doesn't have meaning for the participant or after the fact per se, if you take it that way, causes meaning into society, thus being absorbed into a world that can be dealt with as a well-known and familiar place, thus giving death meaning only through religion. To me, the most important insight developed by Niklas Luhmann is that religion has its own meaning-making system. So if you're trying to make this argument of psychologizing, that means you're trying to understand communication based on individual perception. However, communication is entirely separate from the individual's perception, as I discussed earlier. The individual, if you want to think it this way, is just a neurobiological machine that internalizes the external world, and so you can only interpret the existence of everything around them, but that can't involve itself in the world. So you can't psychologize the communications because they are separated by something transcendental. Something to also think about, provided by Luhmann, is the idea that the religious system is one system. Now this is very strongly understood in the Abrahamic faiths, for the most part, even though there's arguments against it. Just think of it this way. There is only one religious system, whether it comes from these differentiated religions. The religious system is a single, non-integrated, self-describing, but not fully self-describing system. You can look at religions and see they have a common coding, function, and they're also distinct from non-religious communications. He points to the work of Gunther and transjunctional operations as a way to switch from one context to another and understand that this characteristic of faith, because it can take on many forms. And again, this is something St. Paul had pointed out when he was looking at the pagan Gentiles. This is something that was well noted about the God-fearers, which were Gentiles becoming Jews prior to the time of Christ. And so if you're wondering what transjunctional is, it's a type of morphogram requiring more than two values for filling. So if you have like a value table in logic, you have A and B. Well, if you throw in a third portion for a true false indeterminate scale and you have these other values, that's where you're going to use this transjunctional morphogram, and it's usually patterned in cybernetic logic. And if you read Gunther, which I'm still trying to jump through, he proposes to call the type of morphogram transjunctional in analogy to the terms disjunction and conjunction, because it's an operation performed with a transjunctional pattern, is referred to again as a transjunction, the disjunction and conjunction being combined. Anyway, I know that gets a little ridiculous. Another point of departure with religion and other systems is that other systems don't adapt to local and social structural demands or different audience conditions for inclusion and exclusion. However, religion is very adept at doing that. That is why if you look at the communication of religion, it's diverse and full of energy, but it follows the same code. And I'm sure you think that's a bit crazy statement that religion is good at adapting to different perceptual demands of people, but it is. And you can think about it this way. As a Christian, here's a good one. Orthodox Christianity. It is well known for being xenophobic, which it's not, but it has like the Romanian church, the Russian church, the American church, the Greek church, so on and so forth. All of these take those cultural syntaxes and it adapts them into the syntax or the code for the religion itself. It's unbelievably good at that, where no other system that we know is. If you go to Russia and you talk about capitalism, you're going to be doing it in the same code that you would do it in America, which is why it gets rejected in many places, because that code isn't cross-cultural like religion is. So, yeah. So when we're thinking about this idea of looking at like science defeating religion, which is an important part here about these perceptual demands of people, no, it's not, and it won't. Anyway, the last thing that he says in the book, and by the way, he never finished this book. He died writing this. This book is based on a draft that was found connected to a typewriter. The editor and translator said it was not completed, but probably close enough to be sent off for editing. There is no conclusion of the book. So the last thing that was said is communication is initially unsettling and the decision to participate already generates vulnerability. Although the participant is not committed to accepting the communication, he finds himself in a position that imposes that possibility. It is at least expected that he will seriously entertain the possibility that might lead him to articulate the position that a rejection would proceed from, but without considering whether self-description of rejecting the system of religion can endure this degree of clarification. So he's basically discussing the idea that those outside of religion, when their communication or in participation in the communication of religion, they should be listening and understanding and open to accept or reject the meanings proposed, but they should at least attempt to understand the communications of religion itself before they go off and just accept or reject those meanings based on, well, I already know Jesus Christ didn't become resurrected, so I can just reject everything. That's a bad way to look at it. You have to start with being able to understand and listen and open to accept those meanings proposed and then reject them after the fact. Don't just initially reject them and start your analysis there. And so, as we can see now, this is a solid call to reject this logic of religion in a binary way of yes or no, and that this system is something that's used to psychologize and make it easy for us to just adapt our way throughout civilization. At some point in time, we'll no longer need it. Because I hope I've made it clear that because religion is its own communicative process, psychologizing it is incoherent because it is an autopoietic, autonomous system of communication for humans. It is different from any other piece of communication. It's the only place where we can gain meaning without observation. It gives us additional communicative properties for the transcendent. And when it comes to the main factor of religion is setting up a distinction between the sacred and profane, no other system manages to illuminate such a proposition as well as religion. So when you're speaking to an atheist who says religion is stupid or incoherent, explain the importance of religious communications. When you're talking to someone who says, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, make sure they understand that without religion, there is no difference between the profane and sacred, because religion creates those boundaries. There's nothing to be gained by anarchic mysticism because no boundaries have communicative properties. Therefore, I say to you, psychologizing religion, like Peterson and like many others have tried to do in their lifetime, is an incoherent worldview because the communicative processes themselves are entirely separate from your own psyche and from everybody else's psyche. It is a process, from my perspective, that is divine, that is built from and on the Holy Spirit and how it works through our world. And that is the fundamental reason why human communication is so complex and so important. And when we lose that track of thinking and trying to psychologize or sociologize any of these things, we miss the most fundamental part of religion, and that is communication. Thank you. Have a good day.